Well, I'm sat here in the Matthew Mantle's kitchen in rural Devon. You might be surprised to learn he's a professional punter that bets in running from home. Matthew, can you tell us a bit about you and how you manage that?
Well, I started out very young in racing, introduced to it by an elder brother, and was betting probably by the age of about 11 most Saturdays, and graduated from that to be a fairly standard, regular losing betting shop punter, but always fanatical about my racing for a number of years, and that really remained the case until in-running betting came along, which I started in 2002. I think I opened a Betfair account and started soon after in 2003. And yeah, have been doing it professionally now since 2004, so 13 years. I started out originally in a trading office. It was one of the few places that had the equipment and the pictures, because in those days the racing channels and what have you, I'm not even sure I had Sky and things at home in those days. But with the advent of Racing UK and Lesserly at the races with their delays, but that's another story, started doing it from home, and the rest is history.
So, dare we ask, what are your tactics? As most people sitting here will think you can't possibly win at home. You've got armies of people at the course, you've got people in training rooms. How can you possibly win from home?
Well, there's a like most things, there's a narrative, isn't it? There's the story. Don't bet in running. You know, there's people miles in front of you. They're seeing things a furlong in front of you. They've all got the high tech equipment. They're at the track. You're just throwing money to the sharks. You can't possibly win. And there is some truth in that. If you know, in running betting for you is, you know, they're coming up to the line, that one's going to win. Then yeah, certainly if you're watching on at the races, you're about 7 seconds behind live, which is, you know, at least half a furlong. So yeah, you're not going to win. But there are firstly different delays. You can watch the same tracks through Betfair live video, which is about 2.5 seconds behind live, something like that. Racing UK is about 1.5 seconds behind live. Neither of which are ideal. I would love a level playing field. But if you're doing things more subtly, if you're race reading rather than, as I say, they're coming up to the line, that one's going to win, then there are still opportunities. And there's nothing like in-running betting for the types of value that you get. You might, you know, if you're a punter, a market goes up, you think, well, that horse is 14s, you know, I'd make it an 8-10 to 1 shot. But the kind of value you get in running, you're never going to find in other books. I'm trying to think of famous examples. If you have Devon, for example, in last year's Queen Mother Champion Chase, went off 5s on, 6s on, and after 2 or 3 fences, it's hit a couple, it's not travelling with its usual fluency. What price should it be? There's no, you know, the bookies for a normal market, after a while everything comes into line, people agree, the market agrees what it should be. For something like that, it's completely up in the air. So this horse, you know, which isn't travelling as it normally does after 3 or 4 fences, it started 5s on. What price should it be? Should it be 2 to 7 now? Should it be evens? Should it be 5 to 1? Should it be 10 to 1? You know, there are opportunities there, and clearly that's a high profile and an interesting example. But there are opportunities all the time when prices are so far out of whack that you would just never find in a conventional market. And quite often, as I say, if you're dealing with the delay, then things that are happening further out are obviously what you're more interested in.
So would you put in a lot of homework? Do you need to know each horse's idiosyncrasies and characteristics? So are you prepared before each race that you know more than people just watching with no knowledge would know?
Yeah, you have. I mean, I pretty well work 7 days a week, so I have a fairly good library of knowledge. But you know, there are horses that you're learning about all the time. There are others. In the early days, it was probably fairly simplistic on Betfair. You know, if something's cruising, everybody wants on. If something's struggling, everybody wants to lay it. After a while, people learn. Oh, Archibald, you know, he cruises along, and then and you know, the market very soon catches up with that. But in less famous examples, then you know, there's still opportunities to be had. And in types of races, in maiden races, things like that. You might have sharper, speedier types who know their job, from Richard Hannon-Yard, someone like that. You might have bigger, backward types who are learning on the job, John Gosden or somebody like that. So horses who seemingly are going nowhere in a maiden, you might want to back at a big price if you think you're seeing signs that the penny's dropping in running. There are so many ways, and you read anybody who's written any articles or done anything, and any advice you see in the Racing Post or anything like that, is what you back to lay, lay to back. You can lay things. I have things I call kind of definitive lays, where I think, right, you're not going to win, and just lay it and leave it, and you're either right or you're wrong. Other things are more trading positions. You might think, may lay a novice hurdler first time up, give it a couple of hurdles, see if it can jump, or what have you. Lay a horse you think is going to be outpaced and back it back if you need to. Or the other way, if you think something's going to have an easy time at the front or is going to travel well, you might back it pre-race and lay it back. There are 1,000,001 ways to do it. And that varies as to, the type of race, the channel it's on. You've got all these things, obviously, in your mind when you're working. How far am I behind? Who's ahead of me in the queue? What can I do? What can't I do? What kind of liquidity is going to be in the market? So there are a lot of factors. But I do think that there's this story out there that's accepted even by racing people. I've spoken to people who clearly know the game and probably know the game a lot better than I do. Do you play and run? Oh, but why would you do that? And you kind of think, well, because there's money in it. And I do think there's don't enter these waters. But it's, again, to give another high-profile one, Dawn approach of Jim Bolger's a few years ago. Won the Guineas, started I think about 5-4 for the Derby. Pulled like absolute stink in the race. And every pundit and commentator to a man, when it was falling out the back of the telly after the race, would say, and of course, if you back Dawn approach, you knew after 5 furlongs couldn't possibly win, had absolutely no chance, you were tearing it couldn't possibly, and yet for the first mile you could have laid as much as you wanted. I don't think it went bigger than 5-2 before they turned into the straight. And yet, and clearly there's a bit of, you often get you knew that couldn't possibly win, there's a bit of after timing. That's sadly a bit inevitable within running betting. You don't know what's going to happen and what the prices are going to be. So any story you have, by definition, has to be kind of, oh, what a price that was, after timing. But yeah, as I say, the World and his wife claimed they knew that couldn't possibly win at halfway, and yet there was plenty of money to lay at short prices, and those kind of opportunities are out there. Clearly, Devon, Dawn approach, these are kind of high-profile things that people would know about. But I think it does give you an idea, and the point I made about Devon, if you've got a really short-priced horse that isn't going well, where is that line? Where does a 5s on shot go in running? And you can't say that it's a right or a wrong price. Clearly, Devon should have been any price you like, given what happened. But horses sometimes drift wildly from long odds on to odds against, and then go and win in running. So there's no definitive answer. And like anybody, I've taken plenty of hits and bloody noses in my time. And plenty of setbacks. You're not going to be right all the time, but I do genuinely believe that in running betting offers opportunities that you just don't get from a normal market.
People do love to hear about disasters. So any particular ones that you can think of where you really did come a cropper?
Oh, plenty. Off the top of my head, again, to keep them fairly high profile, last year's champion bumper, Feyenoord. I had laid pre-race with bumper horses, a bit about them, particularly the good ones, but there's not a great deal of evidence to go on. My thinking was that although there was undoubtedly talent there, that it might be a galloping type and might not have the pace of 1 or 2, and in the hurly-burly suddenly going into 20 odd runners at Cheltenham, what have you, that those horses can come down and get lost in it. It's very hard to kind of dominate that type of race. So I'd laid it for a good chunk beforehand, and as the tapes went up, it went sideways. So rather than trying to be prominent, as I'm sure they'd hoped, it ended up not just last, but detached at the back of the field. And all the way around, I could have got out at 20, 30. It never went crazy prices. If it had gone to 500 to 1, I would have had a fiver on to, take the stress out of it. But all the way around, I could have got out at any price. And even coming down the hill when it was going well, you think you've still got the whole field to pass. There's ones in front of you from, all the top stables. Mullen's got a few, Henderson. They've all had the run of the race. They're sitting ready to go off that bend. You're not going to, even when it started cutting through, you're not going to get the 4 or 5 in front. And then you have that moment and you falls to the pit of your stomach and you realise you've done a lot. So, yeah, and that was from just a sense of you can't, not in a champion bumper, you can't come from that and happy to, that's not going to happen. Rather than give a bit back, I'll have all of that. And ultimately you pay the price. And then that's probably the other facet of what I do. You have the mind games, because Cheltenham obviously is a huge thing for everybody. It's a huge thing for me, not only for the fun of it, but the great racing, the liquidity in the markets. It's a big week when you hope to do well. So to take a huge hit like that, then the mental side of it comes in, and how you react to that. I often liken it to kind of other sports. If you think, I watch a lot of American football, and the great quarterbacks, as well as the the obviously ability they've got. A lot of it is mental, and they treat each particular play. What's the best thing I can do here? What's the best result from this moment? Knowing that if they get all the little bits right, in the long run, that's going to give them the best result. So rather than, I've just done a lot, right, what's the next race? Let's have that back. It's very hard to do, but to have that mindset of, right, the best way to get that back and then some more is to play every race. In cricket, you might say that they'll treat every ball on its merits. And the temptation, as I say, is just to think, right, I'm going to have that back. And then, of course, you can dig yourself a far deeper hole. But doing it, as I say, 7 days a year, 300 and plenty days a year, there's going to be plenty of opportunity. Which doesn't mean it's sometimes hard not to rein it in. And certainly if I look at my results, one big minus, there's quite often another big minus not too far behind, because it is hard to, I've just lost a load, I'm going to start by getting a tiny bit back and another tiny, it's not always easy, but I know that's the way to do it.
What would your advice be to anybody watching this? They're thinking, hang on a minute then, maybe I can have a go at this. What do you need to be successful doing what you do from home?
Well, you need to know what you're doing. I mean, I wouldn't, pretend, come on in, have a go, it's easy, it's a license to print money. It's not. I guess the message would maybe be that if you think you've got a talent for race reading, that it's maybe not as impossible as you've heard. And try it with small stakes. I mean, Betfair taking £2 bets, do it for small stuff, but you've always got to realise where you are in the food chain. As I say, if you're watching on At the Races, you are 7 seconds behind other people with all the equipment. There's no point in trying to do something inside the final furlong. But if you're race reading, I don't know, I've talked about high profile stuff. If you're watching a sprint handicap at Pontefract, say, you've got a horse that's won its last couple, but it's in a tight handicap, it's up in the weights, it's had an easy lead in small fields for those, and it goes off, 5 to 1 joint favourite in a 15 runner field. It's used up loads of petrol out wide, it's not got to the front, it's trapped wide, it's still taking a pull. It's no longer 5 to 1, it's any price you like, and the market suddenly takes a while to react to that. As I say, that there are moments almost when the market, okay, well, this was 5 to 1, it's not going well, maybe it's 7, 8 to, well, it's not, it's 20, 25, 50 to 1, it's any price you like. So yeah, if race reading is your thing, then have a go, start small and see if it works out. But do always be aware, as I say, I'm not saying that it's not true, it's a level playing field, it's not. There are things stacked against you, but they don't have to be insurmountable. If I was racing Usain Bolt and he was giving me a couple of seconds over 10 metres, I'd be very confident. Over 100 metres, I'm sure he'd be pretty confident. As long as you know where you are and what you're up against and what you're trying to do, then there are things that can be overcome. But you're not going to do it, obviously, beating the quick pick boys. If you're trying to do what the majority of them trying to do, they're coming up to the line, that one's going to win. That's not going to happen. You need more subtlety. But that doesn't mean that it can't be done.